Well, good evening, and thanks for joining us again here for our third digital Awana. Now, I hope that you guys have taken the time to go and look at the game that we're going to be playing, or the game that we have, the scavenger hunt that we have for you guys. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But today, as we're continuing through our lesson here, trying to make sure that you guys stay on track, I want to first start to talk a little bit about dessert. Now, I bet a lot of you guys like dessert, but my question for you guys is, how do you like to eat your dessert? Or maybe you guys are like the people who are going to eat the dessert as quickly as possible. It comes down and sits on the table and you are going to eat it. You want to make sure no one else gets a chance at it. Or maybe you're the kind of person who eats the dessert kind of slowly, wants to savor it, just eating kind of slowly, and then you want to maybe save a portion of it and put it back in the fridge so you can eat it later. I like food. I really like dessert. And my favorite restaurant is called The Melting Pot. And The Melting Pot has such great food there. And it's a 4-course meal. It's got cheese fondue to start with and a salad, and then it's the main course. But the best course, the best part of it, is that dessert. But see, a lot of times you go through eating at that restaurant and you get so full through the first 3 portions of it that you really don't have enough stomach left. You really don't have enough hunger left to really eat that dessert. And so this restaurant takes a long time to eat there, but man, it is a great restaurant. But it does take a little bit of self-control to kind of sit there and make sure that you eat just enough to be full when you leave the restaurant, but not too full that you can't eat your dessert. Because the dessert there is a chocolate fondue, and you get dipping things you can dip in that chocolate, such as graham cracker covered marshmallows, or Oreo covered marshmallows, or they used to do cheesecake. So I had all these different fun things that you can really eat with this fondue, with this chocolate fondue. But see, this restaurant, it requires a little bit of self-control in order to make sure that you can really eat enough food but still leave enough space in your stomach to eat that dessert. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about this idea here of self-control. All right? I want to talk to you guys about self-control because I think a lot of times in our lives we deal with a lack of self-control. In fact, it's not just you guys. Everyone deals with a lack of self-control. We can always gain more self-control. So I want to look today about self-control. So turn with me, if you will, to page 226 in your book, and we're going to look at our memory verse for today, which is 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11. It says this: "But you, O man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and gentleness." Now I want you guys to remember those 6 things that I just said there. And I don't know if you guys have played tag before, but I'm pretty sure you guys have, because I've seen several of you guys play tag before our Awana before Awana and after Awana. But the game of tag is one of those great games. It's a lot of fun, and many of us play tag a lot. But in the game of tag, if you are it, you have one goal. And your one goal is to do everything that you can to find someone else to tag. And if you're not it, then your one goal is to stay away from people and to make sure that you don't get tagged. And sometimes we play a game of tag and we play with people that make it really simple, make it really easy, like they are easy to get. But sometimes we play a game of tag with someone that's really fast. And in fact, if we play the game of tag and we play with a lot of people that are really fast, it can be really, really difficult in order to tag someone. And so we have to work really, really hard to tag someone. Well, see, this is kind of what our memory verse is telling us to do. It's talking about something very similar to that. It's telling us that we need to pursue. Now, to pursue means to work really hard for something. And it tells us we need to pursue 6 things. In your book, 3 are written down: the righteousness, godliness, and faith. These 3 are written down, but the next 3 we have to write down ourselves, and that's love, patience, and gentleness. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about this idea of gaining these. Now, before we get any further, I want to look at gentleness. Now, sometimes we think of gentleness as being weak. We think of gentleness as this kind of being not able to do something, or just being soft. But I want you to understand, gentleness is not weakness. It doesn't mean that we let people run all over us. It doesn't mean that we let people hurt us. It doesn't mean that we let people abuse us. It doesn't mean that we can't stand up for ourselves. What it means is that we have power, but that power is under control. It's not a lack of power, but it's that we have power under control. It means that we don't seek revenge. And so I bet there's been times in your life in which you have wanted revenge. When you have had someone do something against you that you just wanted to kind of get back at them. I know you've probably been there because I've been there myself. When something did something wrong to me, I've had that feeling of, hey, I want to get back at them. I want them to get what's coming to them. But you see, that's not what Jesus tells us to do. That's not how Jesus tells us to live. He tells us to have love, to have patience, and to have gentleness. And so I want us to look at a story that most of us have probably heard about. In fact, since it was Easter weekend, just last weekend, we probably have heard this story pretty recently. Maybe we've read it ourselves. I want to look at Jesus' crucifixion, which is found here in Luke chapter 23. I want to look at and focus on in verse 34. And it says this, "And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments." See, in the midst of being crucified, in fact, Jesus was actually laying against the part of the cross that was on the ground, and he was having these stakes driven through his wrist at this point of time. And in the midst of this happening, in the midst of extreme anguish and pain, he told God, he told his Father, he said, God, don't hold this against them. Don't let this be kind of a stopping factor for them actually becoming in relationship with you. He cared about them so much that even in the midst of being crucified, in the midst of being killed, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that's what leads us to point 4, which is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And you want to kind of fill in that portion in your book. And not only do we see Jesus doing this, but we also see another man named Stephen in Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, verse 57 through 60, it says this, "But they cried out with a loud voice, and they stopped their ears and rushed together at him. Then they cast him out of their city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of the young man named Saul. And as they were stoning Stephen, he called out, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. And falling to his knees, he cried out," and listen to this part, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." And when he had said this, he fell asleep." Now I want you to understand this idea here of stoning a little bit more. Stoning was a way that people, especially the Jews, would punish sin, would punish people doing the wrong thing. And stoning was not just picking up a little stone and throwing it at someone, but it was taking rather large stones and dropping it upon them. And then after those large stones were dropped upon them, where bones were broken and they could no longer move, they would continue to do this until that person died. And sometimes they would just leave that person to die underneath these stones. It was a very painful way to die. And so this is not a fun thing. And then Stephen, he's actually what we can call the first martyr of Christianity. And he was the first person who died because of his faith. And in the midst of this very painful way to die, Stephen feels for these people. And he says, Lord, do not charge them with their sin. That's what we have here for point number 5. Lord, do not charge them with this sin. See, Stephen wasn't saying that this was right. He wasn't saying that this wasn't a sin. He was saying, God, don't let this be against them. See, it would be like us in the midst of being beaten up by a bully, or in the midst of being made fun of, us saying, God, don't hold that against them. Except for it's even worse than that, because Stephen was actually being killed for by what they were doing. Now you may be thinking, man, I don't know how you can do this. This is a crazy way to live your life. I don't know if I could forgive people in the midst of being beaten up. I don't think I could live that way. But I want us to understand that when these different things that God calls us to live, this godliness, faith, love, patience, and gentleness, is not easy, and it requires this thing called self-control. But I want us to understand this as well. Self-control does not come through our dedication. It doesn't come from us saying that we're going to try harder and that we won't do that again, that I'm not going to sin again. It's us relying on God instead of ourselves to defeat temptation. So when I was growing up, we had this tire swing, and the tire swing was one of the tire swings that had the 3 ropes on it, so you could spin it up and sit on it, and then as you sat on it, it would spin the other direction super fast. And so when I was a kid, I loved sitting on this because it would make me dizzy. And what I would do is I would get it up as high as I could go, make it go as fast as I could, and then sit on it and let it spin me around, get me all dizzy. Then I would try to get up and walk in this straight line. See, that walking this straight line is a lot like self-control in our lives. See, it's really, really hard for us to walk on a straight line. You know what? It's not even really hard. It's impossible, if we are truly dizzy, for us to walk on a straight line. Well, in the same way, guys, it's impossible for us to have self-control in our lives by ourselves. The only way we can have self-control in our lives is when we rely on God. In the midst of us doing something or thinking about doing something that's tempting us, and we know we shouldn't, we ask God for help. When we're afraid to tell the truth, we ask God to give us the courage to do what's right. And this leads us to the last question, the last thing I want us to think about. What parts of your life could you use more self-control? I started out by saying, hey, we all can use more self-control. So here's the question. What part of my life could I use more self-control in? Do I need more self-control in righteousness? Do I need more self-control in godliness or in faith? Do I need more self-control to love people? To have patience, even with the siblings or the people who irritate me? Or to have gentleness, which isn't weakness, but strength under control? And so what part of your life could you use more self-control? What part of your life do you need to rely on God more and ask God for help more? And so my challenge for you this week is to strive to do your best to have self-control, but also realize, hey, I need God, and to ask God for His strength and for His wisdom and for His help in the midst of those times. So my challenge for you guys this week is to live a life of self-control, to live a life of righteousness, of godliness, of faith, of love, of patience, and of gentleness. That's my challenge for you guys this week.